This field hockey player named Happy Gilmore is trying out for the city team, but the coach and the assistant notice that he's violent and very clumsy, and then the guy laughs at him and Gilmore starts beating him up, and then he goes home and finds his girlfriend Terry leaving and saying goodbye to him, which makes him go to the intercom trying to convince her to stay, but she says that there's no way she can live her life with a loser. Gilmore also says that she was terrible at her job and adds that she wouldn't be missed there, but he regrets what he said and starts singing to try to win her back. But he didn't know that Terry had already left, and who was listening to this was an old Chinese woman, and this makes her go to his house. The next day, Gilmore gets a call from his grandmother, who is desperate. When he arrives at his grandmother's house, he sees some men trying to take her things, but he tries to stop it. At that moment, a government agent appears and says that the lady has not paid her taxes for a long time. Gilmore tries to convince the guy to leave, and it doesn't work. The guy says that she owes $270,000, and they tell her that she has up to 3 months to pay this debt or the house will be sold. Gilmore gets furious and throws the guy out of the house. After that, Gilmore takes his grandmother to a retirement home, and just as they are arriving, a woman jumps on the windshield and says that she wants to get out of there, and Gilmore throws her some sweets. As soon as they enter the room, the grandmother asks about Terry, and Gilmore lies saying that she suffered a tragic accident, and he promises that he will get the money to get her back home. At that moment, Hal, who is the elderly caregiver, appears saying that it is time for a nap, and when he says goodbye to his grandmother, Gilmore tries to give the guy some money to take care of his grandmother, but the guy refuses, and when Gilmore leaves, Hal curses the lady and tells her to go to sleep. Moments later, the guys who are helping with the move get into a challenge to see who could throw the golf ball the farthest, but the two of them weren't that good. So they bet Gilmore $20 to see how good the guy was, and then the two of them are surprised when Gilmore throws the ball so far that it hits the window of a house, and then they bet another $20 and Gilmore hits a guy and his wife. Happy then has an idea. He goes to a golf course to bet with players who throws the ball the farthest, and his skill impresses a former golf star named Chubb. Hours later, Gilmore goes to practice hitting a few balls, but he doesn't hit any and lets the balls hit him. Chubbs then shows up and criticizes Gilmore for the way he treated golf. Chubb invites Gilmore to train him to participate in a tournament, but the guy refuses, and then Chubb introduces himself as a former golfer and says that he could have done better if his hand hadn't been bitten off by a crocodile, but this doesn't convince Gilmore, and so he shows off his skill without making much effort, and when he goes to repeat the shot, he ends up hitting Chubb's prosthetic, which goes into the middle of the street and is destroyed by a truck. After that, Chubb convinces Gilmore to participate because he said that the prize was money. The next day, Chubb tells him about one of the greatest golfers of today called Shooter, but Gilmore is focusing on Virginia, the director of the tournament. Later, Shooter makes a speech to the opening of the tournament, and after that, Gilmore goes to the place of the match. But a boy grabs his golf clubs and Gilmore pushes the boy, and he explains that he is responsible for carrying the golf clubs. As soon as Gilmore's turn comes, he misses the ball, and that makes him frustrated. And then Chubb teaches him the right way to move his hips. After that, Gilmore hits the ball that goes very far, and that makes the audience impressed. Chubbs then tries to give Gilmore some advice, but he ignores him and ends up missing the hole a few times, and after a few tries he gets it right. Gilmore hears someone mocking his skill. This annoys him and he ends up hitting the guy. Throughout the tournament, Gilmore makes some good shots, but also misses a few times, and then on one shot he makes the ball ends up falling into a lake, and he dives into the river to pick it up and finds other balls. On the last hole, he misses 4 more shots, but luckily he manages to hit it and manages to win. At the end of the day, Gilmore just gets the trophy, but no money. And at that moment, he meets Virginia, who tells him that he could receive more than $200,000 in the next tournament, and that makes Gilmore even more excited. As soon as the conversation ends, Gilmore goes to Chubbs, who says that he should train more. But Gilmore was worried about paying off the debt and wouldn't have time to train, and he thanks her for her help and leaves. Meanwhile, at the care home, Hal has put the old people to work, but one lady complains that her hands are hurting and Hal threatens her with punishment. Gilmore then turns up to see his grandmother, and when the two hug, Hal threatens her if she tells him anything. When he gets to his room, Gilmore's grandmother is apprehensive, and she lies saying that it was the heat that was bothering her, and this makes Gilmore try to fix the air conditioning, but he ends up falling into a lady. After that, Gilmore goes to the golf club, and there he meets the last 3 winners who are wearing a golden jacket, and then Gilmore teases Shooter and asks where his was. The guy then gets upset and decides to invite Gilmore to a meeting of golfers. Gilmore then goes to the place, but he ends up being hit by the sprinklers that leave him all wet, and at that moment when he is leaving, he meets Virginia, and she asks him not to do anything, because things would get complicated for her side. As soon as Gilmore arrives at the place, a guy offers to clean his car, but soon the police arrive and take the guy away. When Gilmore goes to sign up for the tournament, he needs a guy to carry the bats, so he decides to invite the guy who is going to clean his car. Before the match starts, Gilmore meets Gary, who tells him to focus on thinking positive, But when Gilmore goes to make the shot, he misses the first, but then hits the second, and after that Gilmore hits another shot and celebrates a lot. During the tournament, Gilmore manages to hit several balls, and meanwhile in the retirement home, his grandmother also celebrates a lot, and then he makes a weak attack. This makes him so angry that he throws a pole that almost hits the cameraman. Meanwhile, the president of the tournament named Doug watches Gilmore's behavior and is determined to remove him from the tournament, but Virginia convinces him not to do this, because the audience has increased because of Gilmore. When the tournament ends, Shooter receives a check for more than $200,000, and a reporter asks him about Gilmore's performance, and Shooter despises Gilmore. Gilmore then shows up to pick up the prize, but is annoyed to be told that there is no prize for him. Later, Gilmore goes to the club bar and Shooter goes up to him to disturb him, but Gilmore breaks the bottle and threatens the guy. So Virginia shows up to end the disagreement. After this, Virginia scolds Gilmore to stop his behavior, but when he says that all he cares about is the money from the tournament, Virginia advises him to change his behavior or he'll end up being expelled from the tournament and won't win the money. After which Gilmore asks her out on a date, but she refuses, saying that she doesn't go out with golfers. The next day, Gilmore returns to the tournament and is surprised to see that his ex-boss Larson is there, who was there to support Gilmore. Gilmore then returns to the tournament and makes an incredible shot, but doesn't celebrate in an exaggerated way. When it's Shooter's turn, Larson despises the guy, and that makes him get scared and go back to his shot. Over time, Shooter began to lose his fame, and meanwhile Gilmore was getting the public excited. During another match, Gilmore throws a ball that ends up in the mouth of a crocodile. And this was the crocodile that ripped off Chubb's hand, and so Gilmore goes up to the crocodile and manages to recover the ball. And with that, he became successful and won several checks that almost didn't fit in the car. And he also tells his grandmother about his conquests. After that, he meets Virginia and decides to ask her out again, and this time she accepts and says that it has to be like friends. The two of them go to a field hockey arena, and suddenly the lights go out and the song Endless Love starts playing, and this reminds him of his grandmother. So he tells her about his grandmother's situation and asks her to keep it a secret. Gilmore proposes a challenge to her, that if she manages to shoot a puck into the goal, he will never disturb her again. But if she missed, she would have to kiss him. So she manages to hit the puck, but they still kiss. Meanwhile, Shooter is talking to Doug about the shame that Gilmore caused golfers. But Doug won't take him out of the game, because he's attracting a lot of sponsors. The next day before a game starts, a guy starts making fun of him, and this ends up working, because Gilmore didn't hit any shots, and this leaves him in last place. And a gentleman who is a TV presenter called Barker also mocks Gilmore, and this causes Gilmore to punch him. But Barker ends up fighting back, and they start fighting. Meanwhile, the guy who mocked Gilmore was a Shooter fan, and he was hired to get in the way of Gilmore, and so he gets some money from Shooter. After finding out about the fight, Doug tells Gilmore that he's suspended for a month, and this makes him desperate because he really needed the money. After that, Gilmore goes to a diner with Virginia and says he's quitting the tournament. And at that moment, Virginia has a great idea. She puts Gilmore in the Subway commercial, and that makes him win the $270,000. And with that, now Grandma can have the house back. But when they arrive, they find out that the house is being auctioned off, and the only way they can win is if they make a very high bid. Shooter was there and makes a bid of $350,000 and gets the deed to the house. Gilmore then goes to get back at the guy and also threatens him, and Shooter says that he has to leave the league. But at that moment, Virginia appears and convinces him to continue in the championship. So Gilmore proposes an agreement with Shooter that if he wins the championship, the house stays with him. But if he loses, he leaves the tournament. So he leaves Virginia taking care of his grandmother and goes to look for Chubbs, who agrees to train him. That night, the two go to a mini golf field to train, but Gilmore doesn't do well, and then they try to hit the clown's mouth, but the machine sends the ball out, and then he gets angry and breaks the machine. In the next challenge, Chubbs tells Gilmore to think of a happy place, and then he sees Virginia with 2 mugs of beer and Grandma winning money on a machine. It works, and he hits the shot. At Gilmore's house, Chubbs gives him a bat to play gold, and then Gilmore gives the guy a present. But Chubbs opens the box, and when he sees the crocodile's head, he gets scared and falls out of the window. On the day of Chubbs' funeral, Shooter shows up to tease Gilmore, but Virginia pushes him away so he doesn't cause another funeral. On the last day of the tournament, Gilmore hits several shots, and this annoys Shooter, who goes to the forest to try some shots. But he can't hit the ball, so he decides to call the guy who mocked Gilmore before back to the tournament. While Gilmore is applauded by the audience, the guy ends up running over Gilmore, and then he hits a tower and then runs away. Gilmore is advised by the doctor to leave the game, but Gilmore doesn't care what he says and gets up to play. But his moves end up being hampered, and this means that he is not doing well in the table. So he tries to think of something happy, but ends up watching a Shooter with Virginia and also his grandmother. In the midst of Gilmore's stress, Virginia shows Gilmore that his grandmother was there to see him win, and she says that she doesn't care about that house but about Gilmore's happiness, and that makes him think back to happy times and start playing well again. and seeing this, Shooter gets angry, and then he makes a throw that ends up falling at Larson's feet, and when he hits the ball, Larson threatens him, and that makes Shooter get out of there. Quickly, in the final part, Shooter manages to hit the shot, and when Gilmore goes to make the shot, a group of fans climbs a tower that ends up falling and disturbing the game. But even so, Gilmore manages to make the shot, and the ball hits several places and falls into the hole, and he manages to become the new golf champion, and will be able to win the golden jacket. But Shooter steals the jacket, causing many people to run after him, and then Gilmore manages to return to his grandmother's house. If you like the video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you can receive other videos like this. Thanks for watching.